Hello, good morning. I'm Riz Lorenzo from the Center for Nationalist Studies, CSSP chapter. So, since Rep. Walden Bello had given the goals of Akbayan, I would like to ask Mr. Renato Reyes to kindly elaborate also on the programs of the program of the government he is posing a while ago. And in line with that, how would this government respond to what is happening now, wherein we are in a global scale, yet the Philippines suffer. The Philippines is rich, however, the Filipinos suffer.
Okay, do we have other questions? Tapos yung iba sa likod na lang, please.
Okay, ako na naman. Tanong ko to kay Representative Bello. Indeed, maganda yung participative democracy. Pero paano to i-implement or paano to i-write as law kung it will kill the lawmakers themselves?
Thank you. More questions from the back.
All right. I'm Fatima from Mascom. My question is, will democracy work if there is a general distrust to the government and society? Because I think that even if some Filipinos look forward to the progress of the Philippines, so we can blame some people to be skeptical or distrustful of the government because it's corrupt, it's elitist, or that judicial process is so slow. Is it possible for democracy to work, or how do we operational democracy if people distrust the government?
Thank you. We'll probably take the last two questions, and then any one of the speakers can answer any of these questions.
In 2010, the presidential candidate Niki Perla suggested creating the Department of Civil Society Affairs as a new cabinet department. This would act as liaison between the NGOs and the national government. So basically, it's applying the practice of NAGA into a national level. So how would this work, especially if we are going to come up with policy making in the situation that some NGOs' position on policies or on national policy sometimes go in contrast with the existing policy of the government?
My question is about our Congress, and my question is, what drives the voting blocks in our Congress? Is it ideology? Is it party? Is it the left and the right, or is it the Liberal Party and the other, or Lakas Kampi, or is it just political alliance and family alliances? Thank you.
Mauna na ako. Medyo masalimot yung unang tanong pero tsaka mahaba. Pero kami sa bayan, yung aming tunguhin ay mabuo yung mga organisasyon ng mamamayan at mabigyan sila ng kapangyarihan. No? Hindi lamang sa usaping politikal, kundi sa usaping pang-ekonomiya din. So, in simple terms, no, ito yung land reform, ito yung national industrialization, ito yung mas malaking budget para sa mga serbisyong panlipunan, ito yung ekonomiyang nagsasarili o nakakatindig sa sarili as opposed to sa ekonomiyang nakaasa palagi sa ano yung ididikta o ibibigay ng dayuhan. Ito yung demokrasya na hindi lamang dahil sa nakakaboto ko kaya nagkaroon ng demokrasya, kundi demokrasya dahil hindi ka nagugutom, dahil hindi ka naghihirap, no? Yung democratic interest mo ay natutugunan, no? Yung mga aspirations mo ay natutugunan. So kasama nga yun sa economic program. Doon sa pamahalaan, no? Ang layunin ng bayan ay hindi lang maging bahagi kami o tayo ng kasalukuyang umiiral na sistema ng gobyerno, kundi mabago, no? Mabago ng tuwiran, mabago ng buo yung umiiral na yon. Kasi nga kung anumang espasyong nararanasan natin na binibigay nila, no? Parang token representation dun sa mga marginalized and underrepresented and oppressed, ang laki po ng limitasyon yan eh. At hindi po niyan mababago yung kabuang katangian, no? ng sino ang humahawak ng yaman sa ating bansa, sino ang merong talagang totoong economic power at natatranslate ito sa political power. Kaya kahit nga magbuo ng isang Department of Civil Society sa national level, marami pa rin hong limitasyon yan. Siguro walang pinagkaiba yan dun sa pagkakaroon ng party list system doon naman sa legislative. No? Parang binigyan mo lang siya ng panibagong muka doon sa ehekutibo. No, pero kahit dun sa party list system sa legislative, makikita nyo, at kahit si Representative Bello, alam nito, ang daming limitasyon. Lumaban ka para sa dagdag na sahod sa loob ng Kongreso, syempre, haharangan yan ng mga congressman na nasa payroll o nasa bulsa ng mga malalaking negosyante. Lumaban ka para sa tunay na reforma sa lupa through legislation, syempre, haharangin yan ng mga congressmen na maraming mga lupain at pinoprotektahang interest. So you understand, there are limitations working with these institutions, and yung real power, no, ang paniniwala namin, yung real power, political power, nasa kamay ng tao who are working outside these institutions. Ngayon, kung magsasabay ang kanilang mga gawain, no, walang problema. Pero at the end of the day, naniniwala kami na hindi lang po yung maging mahalal tayo, hindi yun ang end goal. No? Ang end goal nga, yung tao mismo ang may kakayanan at magkakaroon ng pagkakataon na mamuno at pamunuan yung kanilang mga sarili.
Thank you. Walden?
Well, yung participatory democracy, I think we need to work it out as a process with phases, no? You get more and more parts of the political and economic system under popular democratic control. Maybe we start with the budget, no? Sa tingin ko, there will be ang sense ko is that for some time, there will be some sort of creative tension between representative and participatory democratic institutions, no? And I think that's a healthy thing as we make sure that more and more the total political system becomes converted into a participatory democracy. Right now, nakikita naman natin yan that there is this tension between the EDSA kind of democratic uprising and then the more representative day-to-day democratic process that you see in operation, no? So nakikita ko dyan, I don't think it's a question of a sharp break, no? But more of an evolution towards participatory democracy, but with the possibilities of sharp advances as well as sharp setbacks, no? So I think Renato said, that there is nothing that is guaranteed. We have to continue to fight for things, and that the most progressive points that we might reach, there's also the possibility that there's going to be a reaction and to that. No, the question of distrust of democracy. I used to not like the guy at all, Winston Churchill, no? Because he was the representative of British Empire. But, aside from the fact that he was a good orator, parang magsalita, parang Atenista, no? Which is not a compliment, by the way. Mahusay mambola. I know that because I went to the Ateneo and all they trained you to was make bola. No? He said something that democracy is a really bad political system, except all other systems are worse. No? So whether it's a dictatorship, a democracy, aristocracy, or whatever, there is really no substitute for a democracy. Now, the key thing really is that democracies throughout the world now exist with a great level of distrust. No? And in Europe, in the United States, siguro mas mataas pa yung mga distrust levels than the Philippines at this point in time. No? If you were to take a sense, a pulse of where people are at in Europe, I think there's tremendous distrust of the European Union and the existing political institutions. No? So let's not say that that's unique to the Philippines. No? That is everywhere. And the task really of people who are very serious about democratic reform is in order to be able to win back that trust. Now, I think in a way, here in the Philippines, we can see already from the last few months, because of the seriousness of President Aquino about the anti-corruption struggle, is that a lot of that trust is being won back. No? But we also know that it is a trust that is sometimes just centered on a person and not in the system. So mataas ang approval rating ni Presidente, pero mas mababa yung approval rating ng Senate at mas mababa yung approval rating ng House. No? And I think there is this sense that although there is a reform process at work, matindi talaga yung roots of corruption in our country, because you may be able to lop off the heads, and the President may in fact do that. He can lop off some of the heads. But in the end, a real process of reform is one that extends to the middle and lower levels of the bureaucracy and to the nexus between the business and the bureaucracy. Okay? Kasi, you know, a lot of the corruption in government comes because of the interaction with the private sector. Okay? And we know that the private sector, whether it's the Seas or the Robinson people or the whatever, Pangilinans, Atinista yun, talagang they have a great corrupting influence on government. No? So sometimes kasi people just say, oh, napaka-corrupt ng gobyerno. The private sector is very corrupt in this country. So we're really talking about the roots of corruption at all levels that must be taken out. And that what the President has begun is only the first stage in this process. No? So, thirdly, winning the trust of people in the democracy is not just cleaning up the political system, but making sure that a democracy can in fact move towards structural change. No? That it can in fact redistribute income, that in fact it can change the structures of economic power in this country. And that is the bigger challenge. Sa tingin ko, yung cleaning of corruption is a big challenge, but democracy to become part of an economic reform process is an even bigger challenge. So that's why I would say that, yes, there's a great degree of distrust, but at this point in time, where isn't there? Okay? Name me one country in the world at this point in which democracy doesn't suffer tremendous degrees of distrust. And I would wager that we have a higher degree of trust in the Philippines in democracy than in Japan, the United States, or in the European Union at this point in time. Siguro, maybe it's because yung expectations natin are so low. Okay? But, kasi ang taas na expectations doon, no? Second, yung civil society, a Department of Civil Society. Well, I haven't really made up my mind about this. Kasi pag kinahon mo na yung civil society into a government agency, you might be, rooting out a lot of its dynamism and energy. No? So, Nicky Perlas is a friend of mine. He's a good guy. But I'm just wondering whether this idea about a Department of Civil Society is a good idea. More important, I think, is ma-institutionalize yung participation of civil society in all departments and in the judiciary. In fact, itong pagpapili ng Supreme Court Justice, dapat hindi lang mga lawyers yan, hindi lang JBC. Dapat nakonsulta ang tao, nakonsulta ang civil society in this process. No? So, yun pa siguro ang mas malaking challenge para sa atin. I think those exhausted the questions, no? And I better shut up before I get in trouble.
Thank you, Tere.
I see this almost 12, and I think people are hungry, maybe. All right, I'll make this very quick. The question about how to institutionalize popular democracy. This really is a very tricky question, very tenuous question, no? And if we look at even experiences in other parts of the world, Walden mentioned Brazil, no? And this is also a debate among them. So the question of participatory budgeting, for example, for the longest time, well, that was done without really being institutionalized into formal laws. What the activists there in Porto Alegre did was to maximize existing provisions in the local constitution as well as in the Brazilian constitution concerning participation, and thought about this experiment along with state reformers. Again, it was a process really of trial and error. Eventually, they managed to put together a system that combined participation in developing the budget of civil society as well as of the state. So hindi nawawala naman yung state doon sa participatory budget ng civil society. Yun nga lang, hindi na lang nasa kanila ang bola. Yun ang importante doon. It becomes a process really of negotiation, of deliberation, where civil society enjoys deliberative power. That means they're no longer just consulted with the state having the prerogative either to listen to them or to neglect them or not to listen to them. That's the typical idea of consultation. But civil society in this case began to enjoy deliberative power, meaning to say, once decisions are made between civil society and the state, that decision is carried out. And it is binding, in other words. So may bosses on civil society. And this effort was not exactly institutionalized into law. The debate being that if you institutionalize that into law, you're actually entering an arena that is governed largely by opponents of participatory budgeting. And there's a very real danger that by encapsulating that into law, you're going to provide openings for the emasculation itself of the experiment. So kailangan talagang pag-isipan yung usapin ng institutionalization. Nonetheless, there is a broader issue there. How do you sustain reforms? If civil society continually is the actor here, how do you sustain reforms in such a way that it transfers through generation, it's incorporated into institutions? And this is when we need to think about institutional arrangements really for these reforms. So ito yung sinasabi ni Walden na kung may participation, it's something that should be really incorporated. We need to think of institutional arrangements by which participation will really flourish. It cannot be imagined into existence. It has to be embodied into some concrete measures, some concrete institutions that's open, transparent, and accountable, and which people can look into every now and then, right? Yung distrust, dagdag ko lang doon, and I completely agree with all the points here, but I think there's a way of looking at distrust positively. In other words, when you engage government, it's because, on the one hand, you want to maximize spaces, but at the same time, you distrust it in some way, in the sense that you don't want to leave it making decisions all on its own. So distrust, I think, can be turned into something positive, in the sense of something that fires up your engagement with government precisely because you don't trust it to be left alone to make the proper decisions on your behalf. Then you need to engage it. It's one way of thinking about distrust in a way that engages citizens. So distrust not to be jaded, but distrust as a positive force for engagement. Yung Department of Civil Society, sinagot na ni Walden yon. I would just say that maybe this is one reason why it's also useful to think of things that can be accomplished at the local level and then think of ways by which they bubble up. Kasi sa local level, kahit sa pag-institutionalize, mas may puwang. Ito napapansin na natin, kahit sa Pilipinas, mas may puwang, mas maaaring madami kang maipanalo. It doesn't mean that all problems will be resolved at the local level. That's a mirage, no? That's an illusion. But there are some very concrete problems that can be resolved at the local level. And if you can bring out experiments of people's participation, really making progress, really generating social policies that are responsive to low-income sectors, for example, then you fire up inspiration. If you have actual working models on the ground, then that can become the basis for imagining a more national translation. Of course, the mechanics will be different, and even in successful cases like Brazil, dilemma talaga. Things are going to be, alternatives work at the local level. Once you start translating these things at the national level, the mechanics will have to be adjusted. Kasi hindi na pwede siguro kabuuan popular participation sa national level, it will probably need to involve a combination of representative and popular democracy, representative and popular control. As to what that combination will be is something to be worked out. But what's important is defining how that combination is going to work out is not going to be an exclusive process. That's where the defining of the agenda itself becomes a process of participatory democracy. So I guess that will just be what I could add at this point. All right.